would like to ask the sponsor some questions in a friendly manner, if you will, because I am, again, a sponsor on this bill, but I do have some questions. So will the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor, to be clear, you're not on the bill anymore, you're asking the sponsor
Excuse
to
me,
yield.
yes, sir.
Will the sponsor yield to a question?
Yes, I
Senator
will.
Metzger
And
yields.
by the way, thank you
Yes.
for co-sponsoring my bill.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. President, in the previous two budgets, were there any additional funding added in those budgets for broadband?
Sorry, go ahead. No, there has not been, but I would certainly love to see additional funding added to the budget.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield to another question? The sponsor yields.
In those budgets, was there anything included in those budgets that may have increased the costs of broadband projects in these last two budgets?
So there was a provision of the bill, of the budget passed in 2019 that placed a fee for the right-of-way. So, yes.
Mr. President, on the bill?
Senator Borrello on the bill.
Okay. So yes, that's correct. And unfortunately, this has been a terrible impediment to the expansion of broadband. In 2018, this same tax, you call it a fee, you can call it a tax, was proposed. And when the Republicans controlled this House, it was defeated. However, in 2019, with the one-party rule that we have, that fee has now been imposed. And it has already started to cause damage to the broadband access and broadband projects across the state. I've spoken to many of the providers. Number one, they have been plagued with what I can only view as extortion because of the money that's involved from the state for things like accessing lines, because once this tax was imposed, the cost to run lines underground was much higher than putting the broadband fiber optic cable on poles. So many, and this is my opinion, many of these utility companies that own the poles decided they were going to jack up the rates to run fiber optic cable on these poles. In some cases, going from $2,500 per pole to $25,000, so that they could get their access to that fee that we imposed last year. Not me, I wasn't here. Also, in addition to that, there has been a major project in the North Country, which is a huge challenge right now with broadband access, that has now been canceled. According to the Albany Times-Union, the carrier in the North County has abandoned the project after determining that that tax would add a monthly cost of $21.66 per customer, a tax that cannot be passed along to the customer, which is a nice idea, except for the fact that it now has killed projects and will continue to kill projects. This fee, as a matter of fact, is going to represent, on average, approximately 60% increase in the construction costs. In fact, most of the providers would have to scale back their projects by as much as 75%. That means a lot less people are going to be getting access to it. The cost of this tax is actually more than what it cost to lay the fiber optic cables and run the fiber optic cables. So we're going to spend time to do a study, which I'm in favor of. However, this tax is one of the biggest impediments that we have to the expansion of our broadband. Mr. President, will the sponsor yield?
Will the sponsor yield for a question?
Yes,
The
for a
sponsor
question.
yields.
Yes. Thank you. The governor claims that New York has universal access to broadband. Do you think the New York Broadband Initiative has met its goals?
Mr. President, we have made significant progress in New York, but I am sponsoring this legislation because I do not believe that New York State has met its goals. I have it's probably the #1 complaint by constituents in my district, the lack of access to broadband, and this is why we need this bill. One of the biggest impediments, I would say, is not this tax, although there is a bill, I want to point out, by Senator Kennedy that would address that that very topic, which I think is very important. But the fact is that we don't have in New York State accurate information about who does and does not have broadband, about the speeds that people have access to support very common uses. And the affordability issue is huge as well. Many people simply can't afford it, but we don't have transparency from the company on the costs. So all of these issues need to be looked at, they need to be mapped. What is one of the additional and very important provisions of this bill is that it makes this information public. It brings needed transparency and accountability to this issue. It's a necessary step to closing the urban-rural divide on broadband, the rich-poor gap on broadband as well.
To continue to yield.
Will the sponsor yield for a question?
Yes.
The sponsor yields.
So does that mean that we should also expect transparency from the Cuomo administration on what's actually going on with these projects? And, by the way, with the serious flaws in the data that he's presenting, because according to the FCC, they kind of agree with this 98% coverage. However, there's a major flaw in that because it is based on census tracts. And in rural areas, if one person has access to broadband, that entire census tract is actually considered to be served. However, according to Microsoft, and we know that the president is fond of the founder of Microsoft, Mr. Gates, according to Microsoft's data, only 54.6% of New Yorkers actually have broadband. So the governor is ready to spike the football in the end zone, but he actually has barely crossed the 50-yard line on this. So would the sponsor agree that we need complete transparency from the Cuomo administration on the fiasco that is this current broadband initiative?
So, Mr. President, once again, I am in agreement broadly with the senator and so thrilled that he is a co-sponsor of this bill. I specifically added a provision to this bill to make sure that data is collected below the census block level precisely because the census block data collected by the FCC, which is what the state used for its Broadband for All initiative, is flawed, and it does not count. It overlooks many people that do not have access. This was recognized in August 2019 with a new FCC order. They're going to change the data collection, but there's still a lot of uncertainty about when they're going to do this, about what their approach is going to be, and we can't wait. We cannot wait to address this issue. We as a state need to take action and find out this information for New York State now.